Welcome everyone to Fergo and Freak. I'm your host, LeagueFreak, and today we are joined by a new guest on the podcast. His name is Dylan, and he runs Leaguie on YouTube, which is a YouTube channel I come across recently, and I really liked the thought-provoking way that he talked about the game. How's it going, Dylan?
I'm going very, very well. Thanks for having me on. Yes, it's correct. LeaguieCast is it's one of my two YouTube channels, that and the Leaguie, which is my main one, where I make all sorts of different NRL contents.
Nice. How long have you been running those channels?
Just over a year, since last February. So it feels like it hasn't been all that long, but the growth has been pretty good. I've been quite happy with it.
Yeah, I like, you know what I like, and this is going to sound something very small. I like the background you use for your videos.
Oh, yeah?
It's just simple and effective, and it looks great. And I find that some of these other channels, and I'm not going to bag any other channels because I don't watch too many of them, but like some of them, they just go too far overboard with the background. And I think that the background you've got is really nice. But you know what I was thinking is, you know how you've got all of the photos or the pictures of NRL players and stuff in there? It'd be funny if you threw in one every so often that was just a random picture that didn't belong there at all, and see if your watchers pick up on it.
Yeah, well, no, it's definitely one where I've taken advantage of the fact that I go to university and they have free printing here.
Oh,
if
nice.
I was doing it on my own dime, there's absolutely no way in the world I'd use that much colored ink. But yeah, it's something that the viewers tend to like, and yeah, I think it. I mean, I haven't got much of a face to look at, so it's nice to have something else in the background to get the attention.
It's really cool how now, if you've got something to say about football and you've got reasoned arguments or reasoned opinions about football, it basically, the entry level for it is almost $0. Like, and it means that if you've got a talent for doing something like that, you can basically start it up at home and then build something really cool out of it.
Oh yeah, 100%. I mean, I do all my videos from my university dorm room. Right. And as time has gone on, I've invested in better equipment, but the camera I use is still just my mobile phone. I still just use my, normal uni laptop. So absolutely anyone can do it. We're lucky to exist in an era where, anyone who, as you say, has something worth saying, has a platform with which to say it.
Yeah. I think the biggest thing that I've invested in is the microphone, because I always think that that's good to have. And luckily we only do audio, so that was basically the big investment we made. So let's talk about some of the footy. First of all, what team do you follow?
Well, it's actually funny you say that. I haven't revealed what team I follow yet, but as I say, I started last February. There's a little leak that occurred the other day in my Discord, and some people found out. So tomorrow at 4 p.m, I'm revealing who I support.
Oh, nice.
Topical question that you've asked there.
There we go. How about that? So 4 p.m. on Thursday.
Correct.
Excellent.
Yes.
Okay.
There's a lot of 15-year-olds who are very excited about it.
Everyone can tune into that. And once we find out who you support, we can decide if we like you or hate you based on that.
That's my concern. That's exactly why I've kept it quiet.
See, I went the complete other way. I was like, I've always been pretty out there with Penrith, New South Wales, Australia, and then I use it to actually upset people. So I'm go the opposite way with that. All right, so let's talk about some of the footy this year. What have you thought about it this year? Because I tend to think that so far, looking at the competition, it is super close, and I think we're going to see some very good teams miss the finals. And I think any team that has a run of like a month and a half of good form could just find themselves in the final series, even if they actually have absolutely no chance of doing anything in the finals, which is completely okay. But I'm loving at the moment that you can throw in a game and you can sort of think, well, this team's going to beat that team pretty easily. And when they don't, when the result goes the complete opposite way, you're not even upset at it. You're like, wow, that was a really good game of footy, and the other team completely was the better team.
Yeah, no, 100%. I've said a number of times to my audience that if you're tipping well in 2025, you don't know footy. It's just so hard to predict. And it's quite rewarding for me. I mean, I've been pretty vocal about, I feel that the salary cap does tend to work and that we have a very even competition, especially when you look at, yes, we have, the top couple of teams, the bottom couple of teams, but every team in between, there's a lot of potential to shoot up the ladder and shoot back down. So this season, with the amount of upsets that we're seeing, I love it. As you say, I love the fact that we can go into pretty much any game. And every week you look at all the games, and it's genuinely quite difficult to predict who's going to win. So it's been really good to see.
So with the salary cap, it's interesting because we've seen a bit of an anomaly with the Penrith Panthers in recent years, and there's been talk about it's not good to have one team dominating like that. And does the salary cap actually work when you see a team like that? I tend to think it's something that we only see once every 50 years occur in rugby league, and it just so happens we're living through it for the first time under a salary cap system. But for the most part, you basically feel as though the salary cap works for the most part then.
I do, yeah. I mean, obviously, as you say, yes, there's the 4 in a row, which is a big counter argument to it, right? I'd argue that's because Penrith have found a way to utilize their massive junior base, right? You as a Penrith fan, you know all about that. And you've just been able to, as players have left, bring in guys who are very high quality to replace them. You lose a Matt Burton, you bring in an Isaac Tongo. I mean, this season we're seeing, potentially that talent pool maybe be a bit more depleted, but that's what's built your 4 premierships. But below that, I mean, we've seen teams like the Bulldogs, right, come out of a very long period of mediocrity. They put a good coach in, put a good system in, and they're able to get up the table. Conversely, we're seeing a team like the Roosters, who had a lot of departures, who are very, very much struggling, or a big club like South Sydney, who are plateauing. So when you compare it to other sports competitions in the world, yeah, I think we've got a very even competition, and it's quite easy for an NRL fan to only look at our comp and not necessarily compare it to, I think, what's going on in the rest of the world and seeing, how bad it could potentially be.
Yeah, I always find it funny when people say that we should have a draft like they have in the NBA. And as an NBA fan, I'm like, do you understand that we get to halfway through the NBA season and a third of the teams actively are trying to lose games? And it's the worst thing. It's the absolute worst thing you can see in sport, where it gets to the last 10 games of the NBA season and teams will literally take all of their best players off the court if they're winning so that they lose games. And I just can't believe anybody would want to see just that part of a draft being brought in, let alone all of the other problems that a draft brings in, especially for a sport like rugby league. And yeah, I think that comes down to people really looking at the NRL and not looking at it in a wider scale against other sports where, before this Panthers dominance, which, as I said, is a bit of an anomaly, we had so many NRL teams just win one-off premierships for the most part. And basically, the NRL Premiership has gone through almost every club in the game. There's only a few clubs haven't won a premiership, and that's a good thing.
Yeah, it's interesting you talk about the draft and tanking. That's a very pertinent example because, yes, other sports, as you say, teams do tank. Towards the end of every NRL season, right, there'll be about maybe 2 or 3 games every round that are just dead rubbers, right? And it's always a talking point. You see it on NRL 360. Every single media outlet is complaining about the fact that these teams don't have enough incentive to win. That's our problem, lack of incentive to win. Other sports, as you say, there's actively incentive to lose. So it's why I think it's so important to view our competition and its structures in the context of other competitions and look at what we're doing right, contextualize our problems and realize they're actually pretty good. And I think, NRL administrators and all that probably don't get as much credit as they deserve in those aspects.
Yeah, and it's I think the other thing with rugby league too is that the whole idea, and we've seen it with Penrith, where you can sort of be born and raised in the district, come through all the junior teams, and then make it to your local team. And it's all merit-based, I like that system compared to, especially compared to like taking like a 17 or 18-year-old away from their, local area, their support network and everything, and then having them move to, say, North Queensland. Nothing against North Queensland, but it being a very far travel, being away from their, their family and friends. It can be really bad for a youngster to do that to them. And I just think in rugby league, when it comes down to it, if it's not broke, don't fix it. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah. And on that point, I mean, what's so specific to us in rugby league is we've got 50% of the competition now is Polynesian.
Mm-hmm.
And we have to account for that culture because it's a culture that, it's various cultures really, but they all have this theme running through them of family values. These young boys are family oriented. So you're not just taking any 18-year-old and telling them to move to North Queensland. You're taking one out of that culture. And I think it's so important for us to consider that. I don't feel comfortable whatsoever telling an 18-year-old young Tongan, to move away from his family. I think it's such an important thing specifically to the NRL.
Yeah. And also, with Penrith's success too and how they've done it with their juniors, I just think that it should have been a sign for every single NRL club to just invest in juniors because it's like, it's free money basically. And that's the way that Penrith have been able to, have players leave the club and they bring the next guy in from their juniors. And I just think any team that didn't just completely focus all their resource on building their junior bases, they're not going to do well going forward. And I think that that's where you see some of these teams that have bottomed out completely. They kind of went away from building their junior bases up, and it kills them in the end. Like I think of someone like the Dragons. At one point, we talked about the Dragons having a really good junior base, especially down towards the coast now, where they have, the Illawarra juniors and all that. Once they went away from using their junior base, they started to become terrible. And now they're having to try and buy their way out of being a terrible club. And it's been, so-so at best. Whereas if they put all of that time and effort into keeping their junior base healthy and strong and bringing through good talent, they wouldn't be where they are right now.
Oh, for sure. And look, you cite the example of Penrith, who've won the last 4, but let's look at the other end of the table, the Tigers, who've got the last 3 spoons. Campbelltown, demographically speaking, population-wise, it's almost another Penrith. They've got such a big base there of young families, same sort of demographics in terms of an islander population. And they're a club who, I could talk for ages about the Tigers, but they just, I think, consistently fail to grasp that region, fully embrace it. We obsess with this Leichhardt history and all that. Unfortunately, rugby league has moved past Leichhardt, in my opinion, demographically speaking. Campbelltown is their future. And now, in recent years, the Tigers have got a little bit more out of that area. We're seeing guys come through like the Leaguie brothers, good young juniors. But it's going to take time until that transition really fully occurs. And I think they're paying the price for, not truly focusing on that area.
Yeah, I agree completely. And, I understand that some of their fans enjoy an afternoon at Leichhardt Oval, but it's they have an embarrassment of riches down there in the Campbelltown region. It's the fastest growing area of the city, and there'd be plenty of other clubs would love to move in to that area if the Tigers didn't want it. And I think the Bulldogs has been a very big club that would love to move into that area. But yeah, for some reason that none of the Tigers administrations have bothered with it. I think this current administration is a little bit more keen to go towards Campbelltown. But still it doesn't feel like it's the all in on Campbelltown, does it?
Yeah, no, for sure. And it's very interesting because I've listened to a lot of interviews with ex-Tiger CEOs. We're talking about guys like, Justin Pascoe, for example. And they all seem to talk the talk of wanting to prioritize Campbelltown and, realizing that that's the best area for the Tigers' future. But as you say, none of them actually really do it. So it must be, so frustrating for Tigers fans to have, yes, as you say, this embarrassment of riches that so many other clubs would want, but just fail to harness it. But, this season, we put it in the context of 2025, I think they're finally starting to see the benefits of that with a pretty solid start to the season under a young coach. So the future does look pretty good for them if they continue on this trajectory.
Yeah, fingers crossed they do. I think they will. I think, Benji Marshall last year, I know the Tigers weren't good, but you could see the structures he was putting in place, and they were still getting flogged from time to time, but you could see that he had something that he had put there. And I always think that with a new coach, you want to see an influence that he's having on the team. It might not come out in the results every single time, but I think you could see his influence last year, and I think you can see it again this year. They've added more talent from outside the club, but I think that their purchases were good ones. They brought winners into the club, which was a major thing. And if they can just, keep on this track with him and give him the space, I don't think he's under any pressure at the moment, which is good. I think he's going to be a really good coach as time goes on, and I think you can see it in what he has done in turning this team around from being absolutely no hope just 2 years ago to now you watch them and you're like they're going to be difficult for every single club to beat. And I'm not saying that they'll even make the finals this year, but you're going to have to really beat the Tigers now.
Oh, 100%. And yeah, I mean, there's a lot of people that will look at the result of them having finished last year, third year in a row, and just view it as 17th 3 years in a row. But I think to truly understand the improvement that they're making, you have to look at last season in particular. They won a quarter of their games last year. And it ties back into that argument I was making about the salary cap. For our team that's in last place out of 17 to have won a quarter of their games, I find that pretty amazing personally.
Yeah.
And a bit of a testament to the fact that it's working. But yeah, Benji won 6 of their games last year. They're already halfway to that total. I think there's, little more than that he could have done with the tools he's had at that club in terms of their improvement. And certainly I think is one of the more exciting coaches in the league. And I said a couple of weeks ago on the Lockie Galvin situation, which we may get to, if I was a young player in the game, the Tigers are genuinely one of the clubs that I'd want to be at right now in terms of opportunity and excitement. And, to think 2 years ago that you might say something like that is absolutely crazy. So it's a testament to the work he and someone like, Shane Richardson, the CEO there, have done.
Yeah, I think that going into the Lockie Galvin stuff, I think that's one of the things that's getting a really big reaction at the moment, because people can see that it's a really good situation for him to be in right now. And if he wants to be, he can be their main man going forward for like a good number of years as well. You don't know how a player is going to pan out as a junior, and I still consider him a junior player. But like, if the trajectory for his career keeps going in the right direction, he can be their best player going forward for some years. And so to see him immediately sort of turn his back on that, and I understand him wanting to earn as much as possible. And I can also understand him looking at the past of the Tigers and saying, I can't risk it. I don't want to be the next Luke Brooks, that sort of thing. I could understand that too. But the way that it's been gone about by his management, I think has really turned most people off. And I think if it wasn't for that, if it was a case of him coming out and saying, look, I'm a young dude and I just want to do what's best for my career, and I see that maybe being elsewhere, I don't think anybody would have had too much of a problem with it. But then when, it starts coming out in the media and there's messaging from his side undermining the coach and things like that, that's where it turned people off.
Yeah, well, I've done a lot of thinking about the situation. I find it absolutely fascinating because when it first came out, I honestly thought these days were kind of behind the Tigers with the signings that they've made, the figures they have in the club, winners like Api Coruscant, Jerome Luai, Sunia Taruva to some extent as well. They seem like a very attractive place to be, but I've got a bit of a conspiracy theory about it, if you will indulge me here.
Go for it.
I kind of feel that this is very specifically engineered, and I'll explain why. I think pretty much every outcome that has happened so far since the announcement was first made has been the reasonably foreseeable outcome. And I mean right up until the bullying letter, the legal letter that his management have sent. I think it's quite clear that the players in the Tigers are extremely loyal to that club right now and loyal to the project that they're building. It's going to be obvious that when their young star man came out 18 months from the expiry of his contract, saying, yeah, I see my future elsewhere, I want to go, his teammates were going to turn off him, right?
Mm-hmm.
It was going to be very, very difficult for him to maintain those relationships.
Mm-hmm.
So, yes, he was going to be, removed from first grade. I'm aware he's back this week, but I feel that it's just because Latu Fainu is injured. I think probably they'll build Latu when he's back.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was going to, become a difficult environment. The sort of bullying allegations and such, I think that's a reasonably foreseeable outcome. So potentially, we're talking about a guy like Isaac Moses. Love him or hate him, he's extremely intelligent and is very experienced.
Yep.
I feel that he knew what he was doing here, and the angle is that he's trying to get Galvin out of the contract early. I don't know how much Lachlan himself knew about this strategy. He's a young 19-year-old, probably a little bit easier to manipulate than a veteran player. Not that I'm making those allegations; it's just potential. I feel that this could have been specifically engineered for Isaac to get Galvin out the club a year early and get him earning money elsewhere in potentially a better system depending on what comes his way.
Yeah, and I like the thing about Moses, and I don't like the way that this has happened personally, but in terms of like the undermining the coach and that sort of stuff, I've got no problems with Galvin saying to the club, I'm not going to re-sign with you. No problems with that at all. He can do what he wants with his career. But the thing about Moses, and people don't like him. Name one of his clients that is paying on unders. Like, he gets all of his clients really good money. It works. What he does works. And, that's what happens in rugby league. The funny thing is that you see people saying that, I don't want my club dealing with, this play manager or that play manager. And it's like, man, when it comes down to it, if the talent wants to sign for your club, you will sign Satan's client. You know what I mean? Like, nobody has moral compass in rugby league at the end of the day when it comes to, can I get some talent in my side? So, and Moses gets the most money for his clients, and, good luck to him. It would be really disruptive, I think, to have him doing that at your club, but is that the tax you pay for getting someone like a Galvin into your side, where you sign him, say, on a 4 or 5 year deal next time around, and then you get 2 years in and all of a sudden you start having to deal with this stuff from his manager? Maybe that's just the tax that you pay to get his client. And but yeah, I saw people saying that the Roosters weren't going to deal with him again, and it's like, man, if Galvin wants to be a Rooster next year, guess who they'll be dealing with? Yeah, like they won't care about that sort of stuff. So I found that funny. Who do you see as being the teams that really have a real shot at winning the Premiership? There's going to be some teams that are good. There's going to be some teams that make a pretty good finals run, but who are the ones that you expect to be the real Premiership forces this year?
Yeah, well, despite a sort of shaky couple of weeks, Melbourne are obviously the first one that come to mind. They were my prediction to win the minor premiership. Essentially, same team as last year. They were the dominant team last year, despite not winning the comp.
Yep.
But adding a guy like Stefano Utoikamanu, who under the Bellamy system, I reckon is just going to become such a good forward. It seemed to make a lot of sense that they would do well, and yes, they are up there in second. The other one that is on the lips of everyone right now is the Bulldogs, obviously. 6-0. I personally wasn't completely convinced on them until that win against South Sydney. There was something about I wanted to see a bit more consistency in performance from them, even though they were getting the wins. I wanted to see them do it for a long period of time against very good teams. But the way that they're shutting teams out defensively right now is incredible. It's absolutely great. Serrato's the guy who they say built that defensive culture at Penrith that has been so successful, and it's transitioned to the Dogs right now. Defense wins premierships, and they're right up there. But beyond those two, it's so hard to say. So many other clubs that I predicted to do well. For example, the other two teams that I had in my top four were Cronulla and Manly. And those two instances fascinate me right now because they're two sides on paper. I know there's been a handful of injuries. Everyone has injuries. they should be performing at a higher level than they are, but they just can't get the consistency going. Same with Brisbane. It's just so hard to see any of the other teams really having taken the start of the season and delivered their best. So it's hard to say. Well, I'm curious to know what you think, though.
And you know what? You mentioned Brisbane. Like, Brisbane's really weird because I think in every single game they've played this year, I've watched them in parts and been like, oh my God, no one is stopping them. They're just going to beat everyone. And then they lose. And it's like, how did that happen? You know, how did they look like the rampaging Brisbane Broncos 20 minutes ago and now they've lost the game? That to me is a worry for them because it shows a lack of steel with their side that I think you need to win a premiership. The Storm, I think, I said the Storm and Panthers this year again, which was really going out on a limb, I know, but the Storm, I expect them to be in the grand final. The Panthers, I've just seen them do too many miracle things on the football field to write them off until they're gone and dead and buried. So I can't write them off yet. But I think that, see, the thing that gets me is that I feel as though you put the Panthers in a final series and you match them up with the Bulldogs or the Sharks or the Seagulls. I can't tip those teams against the Panthers because the Panthers have so much experience. They know how to win when it matters. We see they get to the finals and they just step up a gear that basically no one else can go with. And I think it would be up to a team like the Storm, who they showed last year was so close to them. It'd be a case of the Storm just, feeding off that premiership loss last year and also being a little bit better. And the Panthers have lost some key players where the Storm didn't really lose any key players themselves. And I could see the Storm beating the Panthers in the finals, but I just can't see any other team beating the Panthers in the finals until I see it happen. Manly's weird because they're another team at times. They look like, wow, this Manly side, they look great. And then they'll just play like 60 minutes of trash, absolute trash football. So I don't know what to make of them. And then you get a team like the Cowboys who can literally play 80 minutes of trash football one week and then 80 minutes of the best football you've ever seen the next week. And so I just think it comes down to a bit of consistency and the teams that have shown they can be consistent over the last few years. And those teams are basically the Sharks, the Storm. We're starting to see it with the Bulldogs. And I know they're down the near bottom of but the Panthers, like, they're really the ones that stand out for me still as the real threats for the premiership, and everyone else kind of has to prove themselves to me at this point.
Yeah, I am a million miles away from writing off Penrith. If you write off Penrith, you clearly haven't paid attention these last 4 years.
Yeah.
I mean, here's a stat for you, which I think would surprise a lot of listeners. Penrith have currently only won 2 fewer games than Melbourne have. Look at the way we perceive Melbourne's season so far compared to Penrith, but Melbourne are on 4 wins, Penrith are on 2. Penrith are 6 points outside the top 4. A symptom of, a result of the inconsistency of everyone else. It means that the top 4 is still a very attainable target for them. And absolutely, like a team with Cleary in it, I'm very, very high on Cleary. I think is going to find their form at some point, figure things out at some point. He'll find a way to get that team definitely into the finals, in my opinion. And potentially top 4. And then you're 3 wins away from winning a premiership. And they are the specialists of that end of the year. As I mentioned earlier, they weren't the best team last year. That was Melbourne. But in the finals, when it mattered, they found a way to get it done, to prime for that moment. So there's definitely a lot of people who are excitedly, preying on the downfall of Penrith and enjoying it. And honestly, like, I understand that they've been at the top for so long. Get the little laughs in when you can, but they're absolutely still a threat. To me, if we're seeing Bulldogs and Storm are 1 and 2, they're number 3, no question.
Yeah. I think that's one of the byproducts of the season being so close is that it's allowed Penrith to have this, and it's been a terrible start they've lost games. They've been close losses, which is one thing that goes in their favour, but it doesn't matter at the end of the day when you lose games. But the fact that the season is so close and that no one is really running away with the competition outside of the Bulldogs, I think it keeps Penrith right there in the hunt. And they've got a couple of more difficult games coming up over the next few weeks, but after that, their draw becomes much easier. For about 2.5 months, they have a pretty easy draw. And then it goes through the State of Origin series as well, where they have a lot of buys and stuff. And I think that that's where we'll all of a sudden we'll be like, Penrith are in 6th. Like, this is a worry. And then people will be like, oh, geez, they're not going to do this. Because really the only thing they haven't done is start the season terribly and come home like with a roar. They've done every other thing. So, you know, if they do that, like, man, I will be doing backflips because I've seen them do everything at that point. The Storm are interesting because as you say, they were the best team last year. They had one of the best seasons we've seen for a long time in the regular season last year. And it took a special team to beat them in the grand final. And I remember after that grand final seeing Harry Grant in the press conference, and he was devastated. And I was like, man, that worries me because he's a great player. And when you see him reacting with so much hurt after the game, I was like, they're going to come back really good next year. And they've looked good at times this year. I know that they really miss Hughes when he goes out injured. But every team misses their halfback when their halfback's not there, apart from the Knights, because the Knights don't have a halfback. But it's going to be interesting to see if they can carry it on. Because if they don't win the grand final this year, like, you got to wonder what else they can really do. Like, they just look so set this year.
Yeah, no, 100%. That grand final last year had so many similar vibes to the 2020 grand final. Obviously, result inverted, but it kind of felt like you had this dominant team who had found a way to win, but the team that lost were just like so ominous for the season after. It looked like they were set to win. They say you have to lose one to win one. I don't necessarily agree with that, but in this instance, it looked like that was what was going to happen. And they're sitting second. They completely could fulfill that dream. But yeah, it is interesting looking at the long-term future of Melbourne. As you say, what could they do if they don't win it this year? Just because of Craig Bellamy, his future has been almost a year-by-year prospect for like the last 7 or 8 years, it feels like. So it's so hard to predict. If he's not there, for 2027 or beyond, who is the coach? Coaching is such a massively important thing in the NRL, and I think it's something that perpetuates a lot more inequality than we give it credit for. Mm-hmm. You see the best coaches consistently doing well, but in terms of the squad that they've got, their spine, I mean, it's obviously spoken about all the time, but every one of those players is top 5 at most in their position. Like, that's absolutely elite. And then the players they've got around them, guys like Xavier Coates, absolutely prime in their position. So, all the ingredients are there for them. And certainly if they don't get the win this year, it will be a real sense of soul searching. What more can they do?
Yeah, like, I would have no idea. I would have no idea because it's not even as though you can say, well, they got to the grand final this year and maybe next year. It's like, well, that should have been last year's goal as well, So, man, I'd be kind of shocked if they didn't win it. And that's why it comes down to, like, I would take the Storm against the entire field except Penrith, and it literally just comes down to Penrith is the Rugby League's boogeyman at the moment, and I think it's going to be that way until someone kills them. What are you thinking about the State of Origin series coming up? We got Laurie Daly. I'm guessing are you a New South Wales? Can you say if you're a New South Wales or a Queensland supporter?
Yes, I am very vocally a New South Welshman.
Excellent. That's fantastic to hear. We've got Laurie Daly is back as coach, which I think when the majority of people that are more casual fans find that out, they're going to go, what the hell is going on? How do you see New South Wales going into this series? Because we've got a hell of a lot of options. The Queenslanders don't have as many options, but New South Wales really does. And I feel as though we could really mess things up by just picking the wrong players at the wrong time. And like I think of, say, the halfback position, where I could see Laurie Daly being talked into Mitch Moses at halfback ahead of Nathan Cleary. And I personally think that would be the wrong decision. And for me, Jerome Luai just walked straight into that 5'8" role. And I think picking anyone else there is just silliness.
Yes. So I was born in 2002, right? My introduction to State of Origin was the 8 in a row. I have just an unspeakable amount of childhood trauma associated with Laurie Daly. So, like, and look, everyone will rightly say the team he was up against, like, you put that team, if you put together like a whole historical State of Origin team, out of that Queensland 17, well, at least we're talking like 7 players, right, who make the all-time Origin team.
Like before that, it was, you would have been saying, well, you're looking at the bulk of, say, the 80s team, and then you're starting to filter through 90s players. Now it's the opposite. Now you're saying, well, we take that 8 straight in a row team, and then we filter through players in the 80s. So, yeah, once again, another one of those rugby league anomalies that we've seen in our lifetime, which is kind of cool to see it.
Yeah, if someone were to pick an all-time Origin spine, either side of Billy Slater, Jonathan Thurston, Cooper Cronk, and Cameron Smith, it would be valid. Like, it'd be hard to argue against. So yes, Daly was up against that, but I do feel throughout his first stint as coach, there were a number of decisions that were within his control that he got wrong. And so yes, I was disappointed when he was announced coach. I was so excited by what Maguire was building, and no hard feeling against him. The Broncos job is a bigger job.
Yeah, and it's one of like the plum jobs in the game. Like, it wasn't just a team; it was the Broncos with this team ready to go.
Yeah, 100%. But you're correct in saying New South Wales has more options, better options. And on the note of the halves, I think a lot of people are sort of romantically looking at what Moses did last series, and he was incredible, right? Without him, we don't win it. But they're not acknowledging the fact that he spent the start of this season out injured. He's still going to be underdone coming into the Origin series relative to a guy like Nathan Cleary. And Cleary to me, I mean, look, I'm 22 years old, but he's the best player I have ever seen. If you don't pick Cleary and you don't win that series, it is such an obvious thing to look back on and think, why didn't we pick Cleary? Like, if it was Queensland, they're picking Cleary. There was never a series where, and not that Cooper Cronk spent much time in bad form, but even if Cronk were in subpar form, Meninga would still pick him, right? So we should definitely still pick Cleary. And if you're picking anyone at 5'8", other than his childhood halves partner, who he played with the entirety of his career almost, who was so good for us last series, delivered, the line break that won us the game in Game 3. Yeah, New South Wales has a habit of overthinking the room so often. I hope to God we don't do it now. But the team we could name, what excites me is the forwards. Like, I've just tossed and turned so much about who we name, but the front row, I would have Terrell May in there. You start with the front row of Terrell May and Payne Haas. My God, any Supercoach players listening, that's the dream. Hooker, not that Robson has jumped out the ground, but he's a very, very solid option there. Connor Watson can come on in that role as well. Back row, Liam Martin, Angus Crichton, Hamole Olakauatu is an option. Hudson Young is an option. At lock, even though Cameron Murray's not there, Isaiah Yeo is one of the great locks of all time. We are spoiled for choice. That's not even mentioning someone like Spencer Leniu, who was pretty solid in last year's series too. So, yeah, I just hope we don't overthink it. Yeah, I agree. And like you look at a lot of those Panther combinations too, and it's funny when I would say, like, in the middle of the Panthers run, that we should pick as many of these Panthers in the State of Origin team as possible, and people would freak out. It's like, what are you freaking out about? These guys win everything they're in,
If you have Cleary and Luai, you got Yo in there, you got Martin. You're probably going to have Stephen Crichton out in the centres. You're probably going to have Edwards at the back at this stage. I think, if he just gets the run of games, he's probably going to get that spot over Tedesco, especially when you look at how he played last week, which was just unbelievable. Having those combinations at state level where those guys don't need to learn each other's games, they know inside out, that is absolute gold. And that's what you win series on, that sort of stuff. That's why when Queensland, who have the smaller player pool, come together and they've played together for so long, that's what they draw upon, are those combinations that they've had together for so long. And now New South Wales finally has that opportunity to do it themselves. I would be very disappointed if we went away from it and we went away from that opportunity. And look, as you say, it'd be a very brave coach / selector to not pick the best halfback in the game and arguably the best player in the game in the series. Because if you lose that series, man, you're not getting a third shot.
Yeah. No, 100%. And even, we spoke of the forwards and halves. The backs for New South Wales, you say Edwards. I definitely think Edwards will be in that position, although if it were Tedesco, I'd feel equally as comfortable.
Yeah, same here.
But the outside backs, right? New South Wales could pick outside backs of wingers, Tom Trbojevic, Brian To'o, centers, Stephen Crichton, Latrell Mitchell. You couldn't ask for anything better than that. Those are generationally gifted players. So, if we have that kind of team and we're not at least competing against a Queensland side who, they have Valentine Holmes at centre. He's pretty good. He's a very good player, but he's not the quality of a guy like Stephen Crichton, in my opinion. Hamiso, who plays fullback at club level, Murray Taulagi and Xavier Coates on the wings. They're pretty good. They're not Brian To'o, though. It is so frustrating as a New South Wales fan to have these better sides, and I feel we've pretty much had it since the retirement of guys like Slater, Cronk, Smith. But we just haven't had that domination that we should have. So, I mean, I've spoken about Daly, but I obviously will be 100% behind him and hoping that we do usher in this era that I feel we should be having.
Yeah, fingers crossed. And that goes towards looking at the test side at the end of the year. Now, we're going to lose a bunch of players to other nations, which is fine. But the Australian team looking towards their series against England, I have a feeling we're going to name a team which is just going to absolutely steamroll England. Even when you take out, all of the Samoan and Tongan players, we have just this embarrassment of riches. And I think the thing that's also interesting is that we've got guys that are extremely skillful, but they're also incredibly athletic and incredibly big. I think the Australian team at the end of the year is going to be an absolute juggernaut of a team. And if they don't win the series 3-0, I'll be disgusted, quite honestly.
Well, it absolutely can be. The side that Australia can name, even when you take out every heritage player to an island nation or really any other country, it's still by far the best in the world. Where my concern lies, though, is that we see year after year with international footy, big players, good players, withdraw due to injuries, right? Mm-hmm. And it's very hard from an outside perspective to question the validity of those injuries. But take a guy like Jerome Hughes last year, withdrew from playing for the Kiwis. It gave us the awesome fairy tale story of Sean Johnson, coming in to save the day. Mm-hmm. But Hughes played in that grand final, right? And I would make the case that if the Melbourne Storm were playing those same weekends that New Zealand were, Hughes would be playing. Hughes would find a way. And it speaks to this big structural thing, which I think is currently limiting our game. I'm very, very oriented on international development, in case it hasn't come across already. But we do view club and particularly origin games as so far superior to international. International is almost just this, little consequence that happens at the end of the year, whereas it should be the pinnacle. It is the future of our game. Looking at, expansionist projects. I'll cite Vegas as an example, right? We're doing pretty well with Vegas, I feel so far, but there's rumors for next year. One of the games is going to be the Dragons against the Bulldogs, right?
Mm-hmm.
If we're looking to attract an American audience, no American is going to get excited about seeing St. George Illawarra versus Canterbury Bankstown. Those words mean nothing. They mean something to us, but they don't mean anything to them. Whereas an American might get excited about seeing England versus Fiji or France versus New Zealand. There's a link. They know what those teams represent. So the international game is, yes, I believe the future. And it does disappoint me year on year as we approach the international season to see Josh Addo-Carr's pull out for this reason, Jerome Hughes pulled out for this reason. And the team that we get in the end is just this diluted version of what they could actually produce, which then feeds into the narrative that the international game isn't all that good. It isn't all that important. It isn't taken seriously.
Yeah, I think a lot of that has to do with how many games we're playing. Like, I think that if we were playing less club games and say the NRL season, started 3 or even 4 weeks later than it does, then players could maybe look to play in the internationals and then go in for any procedures they need, whatever it is. And then they'll still have time to get over those injuries and recover from surgery and stuff like that and be right for the start of the year. Whereas if you take part and you carry an injury through an international series at the moment, you're on the back foot for the start of the NRL season. Even if it's just a case of you're not going to have a full preseason training schedule, you just kind of got to hit the ground running in round 1. It's a bigger ask, and I tend to think that and look, the NRL has been really good. They've said that the future for the game is less club games, and so that's good to see. But I think at the moment, with how many club games we're playing, players have to kind of weigh up. By the time the grand final is over, they've got to weigh up, like, are they going to be ready for round 1 already? Despite there being internationals ahead of them. And, man, it's a tough choice. It's a really tough choice. And I'm hoping that changes when we start playing less games, because it'd be good to see a good 6 weeks of internationals, I reckon, after the season's finished. And at the moment, we really only get maybe at most 4 weeks of internationals, and then it's all over outside of World Cups anyway.
Yeah.
So, fingers crossed for that. I know you were a big critic of the World Cup being cut down from 16 teams down to 10. I think it was something that was needed, because I like watching the last World Cup, and I watched all but 2 of the games. And man, it was a slog to get through, and so many of the games were uncompetitive. And I just think that with the World Cup, we need to be selling like this is the best of the best, and we're going to work out the World Championship. It shouldn't be as much about participation. But having said that, I think if we're not going to have that many teams at the World Cup, we need to make sure that we've got other competitions for those teams to be part of. And of course, the International Rugby League is terrible at what they do, and so we don't really have those competitions outside of the Pacific Championship, which is really good, but it's just a terrible format with all of the, the Shield and all that stuff. Like, no one cares about you winning the Shield. They only care about the main trophy. But I saw you were a critic of that. Do you want to give listeners your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, how many hours do you want me to talk for? Yeah, look, I come at this issue from a very unique perspective and a very biased perspective. So I didn't grow up in Australia. I grew up over in the Netherlands, a country where 99.9% of the population aren't even aware of the existence of rugby league. But there is a competition over there. They do very, very good work. When I first arrived there in 2016, the Netherlands was ranked somewhere between 20 and 30 in the world, right? There were 4 teams. In fact, there may have been 3 when I first got there. And so often matches were, called off because not enough players showed up on the day. But they still managed to get it done. In the sort of 10 years since then, that competition in that country has just gone from strength to strength. The amount of teams in the competition has doubled They're now at 6. They consistently get good participation numbers. They're getting involved with schools, both international schools and domestic Dutch schools. Their women's team is now established. They've got women's players who have competed in World Cup qualifiers. And this is all based on the complete volunteered time of people who are doing it out of nothing but love for rugby league. I've met a lot of rugby league fans on both sides of the world, but the ones that were involved over there are the biggest fans I've ever met, right? Now, the Netherlands are currently ranked number 11 in the world, up from, the mid-20s. When I saw the decision to reduce from 16 to 10 teams, it hurt me so deeply that looking at the qualification process, because every World Cup you'll have Australia, England, New Zealand, Tonga, Samoa, Papua New Guinea, all qualified. Then you've got Lebanon and Cook Islands who are almost guaranteed to be qualified. It takes away that opportunity for the Netherlands to ever make it. That carrot that was there at the end of the stick, that dream that they were working towards for so long, has now been taken out of their reach. That's the emotional plea to it. Now, I am absolutely aware that there's two other key aspects, one being financial and one being the entertainment value. And yeah, you can't argue against the financial case of wanting to make the World Cup more profitable, but you talk about something like how the previous World Cups have been uncompetitive. They're not going to become more competitive by shutting out these other nations from the resources, expertise, and potential that the World Cup grants them. That's only going to isolate them even more and push down those other nations. So sure, we'll have these 10 teams and, for the fans that watch, yeah, we'll get more competitive games. But I would argue that towards the latter stages of the tournament, we get those games anyway. All we're really doing is reducing the number of games. And yeah, I understand it's not nice to watch a game that's 82-0, but one of the greatest moments from the last World Cup that everyone talks about was Jamaica scoring a try against New Zealand. It was the most exciting moment of the whole thing, in my opinion. Andrew Voss went crazy in commentary. It's still spoken about. A nation like Greece, who came into the tournament while rugby league was illegal in their country. They had to train in secret. What a story that was. We're now shutting all of that out. And I feel personally, as a fan of international rugby league, that the reasoning behind the decision has not been adequately justified. If a fan doesn't want to watch an uncompetitive game, they don't have to. They can watch the quarterfinals from that stage onwards. But I just think it was such a tremendous price to pay in terms of the future of the international game for something that, I think is very little gain.
See, for me, it's like I agree with them cutting it down. And I don't think it was an international rugby league decision. I think it was more like after how poorly received the last World Cup was, that the next World Cup was supposed to be in France was basically shut down from happening. And I think they decided that they needed a whole rethink of what the World Cup actually was. The thing that gets me, though, is that they have so many teams that automatically qualify for every World Cup. I wouldn't have that. I would have it being the hosts, and then everyone else has to qualify. And that's where I would bring different competitions in that would allow those teams to have that exposure anyway. So I would have like a full European Championship, for instance, where England has to play those teams. I know England doesn't like playing anybody that's not coming to their doorstep, but I would have them having to do that. I would have Australia having to play the Cook Islands and, have them play Lebanon and play against teams and actually qualify, have a proper qualifying tournament. And it's like, we're just not really going to get that this time around. It's almost as though they're, 90% set on who they want there, and everything else that they're going to announce around that is window dressing. And I agree. For a team like the Netherlands, or I think for a team like Serbia, where rugby league is also like really going pretty well, it's just terrible for them because they're locked out. Canada's another one where I think Canada is a really good place for rugby league. And, even after the Toronto Wolfpack being kicked out of Super League really, really quickly, rugby league in Canada has soldiered on despite that. And, nations like this need a chance where they know they can at least be with a shot of making it. And I think right now they basically know they have zero shot at making the World Cup, and that's not good enough. And I think that comes down to the International Rugby League's lack of planning. But we're used to the International Rugby League's lack of planning at that point. I just think as an organisation they should be dissolved in the NRL runs it all, quite honestly.
Yeah, well, you're 100% correct. The teams pretty much are set every World Cup. And if it stays at 10 teams, I have complete confidence that every World Cup from now onwards, we will see the exact same 10 teams. But yeah, look, in terms of, all these other countries, they now know that they can't make it. Your idea of, playing these qualifying games, I like it. But a lot of it is already happening. There are European tournaments that take place. The Netherlands, for example, I mean, I cite it because it's the one I know about. They do play games against, often neighboring countries like Germany, but they've played games against Spain before in order to move up the rankings, get closer to that qualification process. But the issue is the lack of attention. Rugby league is unique in that it is so concentrated in two very specific areas of the world, that being the north of England and, the east coast of Australia. And it's very difficult to get those people at all interested in these games that are happening in mainland Europe. If, somehow you could organize some sort of broadcasting or television, it would cost, nothing to get the licensing. I think they do it for free. Then that could generate some interest, but it's so hard to present a business case for it without pleading to the emotional side of, say, an organization like the NRL who have the funds to do it and say, you'll take a bit of a loss here, but you're giving the hope of the international game's future a real fighting chance.
Yeah, I think one of the, and I've talked about this recently, because the NRL was formed out of the Super League war, and basically the game was forced into austerity measures because the broadcasters wanted to make their money back after the Super League war. Everything that rugby league in Australia has been about since then has been about getting a return on your investment. And in many ways it is fantastic, because it means that rugby league in Australia doesn't spend $1 unless it knows it's getting more than $1 back. And that's a good thing. Otherwise we end up like rugby union in Australia, which is basically insolvent at the moment. But the downside of that is that you do get these situations where, if you go to the NRL and said, like, if you funded a proper, complete European championship where you've got all of these countries from across Europe playing against one another towards it might be over 3 years to qualify for the World Cup, and it would be good for the game. The NRL's response would be, what is the financial return, rather than is it good for the game overall? And I think that's the blind spot with where we're at in Australian Rugby League at the moment. And look, I think compared to the alternative where you waste away money and you never have that thought of like, we'll just spend money and worry about it down the track. You don't want it to be like that. And that's why I wonder if the NRL should take over International Rugby League, where it can at least in that regard look at, what broadcasting revenue it might be able to get out of the entire international game. And you're obviously going to get to a point where, teams like Australia and New Zealand and Tonga and Samoa and all that, they're getting the big broadcasting numbers, they're getting the money, they're getting the sponsorship. But if you can have those big games subsidizing the likes of the Netherlands and Serbia and Germany, that's where I hope we see the international game going, so that you do allow there to be some return on your investment, but because the NRL is controlling it all, they can then see it themselves rather than saying like, we can't just send money overseas and not see what we're getting back for it. Does that make sense?
It does, 100%. And I fully acknowledge that I do sound like a bit of a petulant kid, not acknowledging the sort of business side of it. I get that. I'm just
No, dude, I completely agree with what you're saying. Hey, like I mean, the Netherlands don't put their hand out for $1 off anyone. That's what's so cool about what they do in the Netherlands. Serbia's the same. Like, imagine if Serbia got the same support that Wales gets out of the International Rugby League. They'd be flying. But we don't put money into those areas. And at some point, we have to. And I just don't think the International Rugby League's up to it at the end of the day. I just don't think they're going to do that, hey?
Yeah, no, 100%. And it's a real aim of my content to essentially make people aware that the game does exist in all these places and tell the stories. For example, I mean, when I was young, I would have been about 16 or 17 years old. Me and my father were both match officials in the Netherlands. He was a referee, I was a touch judge.
Oh, that's cool.
It was so much fun. I touch judge a proper men's international game when I was 11 years old.
Oh, wow, that's awesome. Who was it between?
That was the Netherlands versus Germany.
That's awesome.
Yeah, no, honestly, like the best times. But we were invited over to Ukraine for a match officials course. To take us up a level. And we learned so much when we were there about the Ukraine Rugby League and everything they're doing, really from the ground up, grassroots stuff, boys and girls in schools. Because the advantage of a country like Ukraine is that union isn't necessarily very big there either. So league has a lot of potential to grow. And despite everything that has happened there in recent years, the Ukrainian Rugby League is still going. This is the resilience of these people. And I don't blame the vast majority of Australian fans for not knowing about it, right? Because NRL 360 will instead spend an hour misreporting that all high tackles are now sin bins, because apparently that's more important for our game than telling these awesome stories. But it's something that I think is important to know and acknowledge. Yes, business and money doesn't really care about people's feelings, but sports has so much emotion in it. And yeah, I feel that we do need to factor those things in. But the NRL, it's the only entity really in global rugby league that does have the backing financially to take on a challenge like that. And we can get to talking about their acquisition of the Super League potentially. I've tossed and turned so much about whether I think that's good, but I think it might be necessary. The Super League.
We'll give us your thoughts on that, because like our listeners have obviously heard what mine and Andrew's thoughts are. So you give us your thoughts on that, because it's interesting to see that you've gone back and forth on it, because it is one of those subjects where at a certain time of the day you could be like, yeah, it's a good idea, and then another time you're like, nah, that's a terrible idea. So tell me what you think about it.
Yeah, well, I'll start by saying that there are people who are vastly more informed about it than I am. I did listen to your podcast where you discussed it, and the chat was very good. And the person that you had on was, obviously very informed. My concerns and the positives and negatives come from two very different aspects. The positive, yes, is that the NRL has the backing, has the expertise in dealing with rugby league, making it financially viable, growing it in markets and looking to expand it indeed across the entire Pacific. And the expansion internationally of the Super League is something that I think has to be a very prominent goal. Expanding, into France, where I think there's so much potential. But when I dare to dream, you could have teams across mainland Europe. I mean, back to the Netherlands again. Imagine away days in Amsterdam. That would be such an attractive prospect. Hull KR played a pre-season game in Amsterdam just this year. It was very successful. So from that perspective, I like it. The negative side of it is that I do have concerns that the NRL will come into it with a bit of a sledgehammer without the respect that these very historical English teams deserve. You look at a team like the Huddersfield Giants. They've existed for longer than Rugby League has. They go back to when it was a unified sport. And although a city like Huddersfield might not be the best in terms of growing the game, that's a history that we can't ignore. And if we do come into it as just, these foreigners who we've always had a bit of a, superiority complex in the NRL over the Super League. If we come into it with just complete disregard for all that history, I really think we'll alienate so many fans, and it will almost be, dead and buried before it's even started.
Yeah, see, the more I think about it, the more I think that the NRL, if the NRL wants to get a footing in Europe, it should start its own competition. Like, just because any other way, it's got the baggage of, English Rugby League has so much baggage that to work through. I just think there's so much you would have to put into, placating people, and then the politics of it all, and then the fan bases and all this sort of stuff. Whereas I think you could go over there in their winter, so you're not competing directly with Super League, and you could run you start off with even a 8-team or a 6-team competition, even call it a Rugby League Grand Prix or whatever, and put on a show and look to, at the very least, be an example of what's possible, and at most have something that maybe you can build upon going forward. But at least that way you control it all, and there's no baggage. And it's almost like with an A-League, with the Hyundai A-League sort of situation where, soccer in Australia got to a point where it was like there's so much that we have to deal with, and maybe the thing is to start with a clean slate. Now, I know that did alienate a lot of soccer supporters when that happened, and they're still alienated by it today. But the best chance that soccer has had in Australia has been the A-League, and when it's been at its most popular domestically, at least, it's been through the A-League competition. And I just wonder if that's sort of the blueprint. Another blueprint would be the Big Bash League cricket competition, or the IPL, where you start this new competition and you've basically got a clean slate and you see how it goes. But I tend to think that's maybe the way the NRL should do it, because there's so many problems that the English game has within itself. I think you'd be putting out so many fires full time by actually taking over their competition, whereas you could start a new one from scratch. And I think that once you showed you had that new competition running, and that it was successful, and that it made money, and that people were interested in it, if they were interested in it, that you would then be able to bring in established teams from France and obviously Super League to start off with, and then you could look further afield. But at least then you're starting off with something that is a clean slate, and you're not trying to, fix the hole in the Titanic, because I think that's what that's where we're at with English Rugby League right now. Like, all of the statistics for English Rugby League are pointing in the wrong direction. I know they had good attendances this last round, but the playing numbers of the game over there, and the broadcasting deals, and everything is going in the wrong direction, and it needs turned around. And I just think that maybe that's the way to go for the NRL, is come in, do their own thing, and go from there.
Yeah, well, it's the decision of, yes, you can take the foundations that the Super League has, but as you say, you're getting that baggage as well. The thing that the NRL have made very clear throughout these negotiations is that they view the international expansion of it through Europe as a priority. They've been absolutely adamant that the two proposed French teams, obviously both exist, Catalans and Toulouse Olympique, need to be part of this new competition. But so it's interesting to me, looking, long term. Let's say, you've just gone into quite a bit of depth about how it could all work. Let's say it does work, and they get to realize their dreams of expanding into Europe. That then ties back into what we were saying before about working with the organizations that already exist in these countries and funding them and getting some sort of, grassroots groundswell there. So, as I say, it ties back to the NRL having a vested interest in the success of rugby league in these countries, so that they say, they want to make a team in Madrid down the line. There's already a bit of an established presence there. So, I mean, look, I completely trust the business analysts in the NRL to do a much better job of assessing the facts than me, some university student who doesn't have the figures in front of him. But as a rugby league fan, just wanting the best for the sport, I really have so many visions and dreams of this future, and I just hope there's a way we can make it happen.
Yeah, same here. I mean, can you imagine even within the next 20 years, a Serbian Super League team, and how crazy those crowds would be if you've ever seen Serbian basketball games. Imagine that in a rugby league game. It would be just crazy, absolutely crazy. And I love the idea of getting to a point where we've got 4 French teams in Super League, and we do have a team in Spain, and if we could get the Netherlands having a team and Germany, it'd be awesome. It'd be absolutely awesome. And that should be the goal down the track.
Yes, 100%. And the example of Serbia, it's a very interesting, unique setup because to my memory, the current champions of the Serbian rugby league competition are Red Star Belgrade, who were obviously very famously one of the biggest soccer teams in that country. I believe Partizan Belgrade also have a team, rugby league team, as well as their more famous soccer club. So the rugby league competition has firmly attached itself to soccer in that country, and I think that's pretty unique, and it's something that we could replicate throughout the rest of Europe. Obviously, when never overtaking soccer, right? But Real Madrid also have a basketball team. Why couldn't they, potentially have a rugby league team as well? Take advantage of that opportunity. It's at least worth considering. It would be so cool. The English Super League was originally set up as the European Super League. That was the goal.
Yeah.
And yes, there's been, unfortunately, failed ventures. I was such a fan of the Wolfpack.
Same here.
Yeah, me and my father actually were lucky enough to get to go to Toronto.
Wow.
When we were over there. Yeah, and, meet Fufu, Moi Moi and all that stuff. What they were building there was so good.
Do you know the thing that got me is they built, and I didn't go, obviously, but just looking from afar, it looked like they had built this experience in Toronto, which was unique enough that people in Toronto were like, oh, what's this thing? I'll go and check it out. Oh, and I can't believe it was thrown away so easily.
The Torontonians, I think is the correct term, they got around it so much. And there's a real sporting culture in that city. They've got, the obviously NHL team, that's the big thing in Canada, but Toronto FC, their soccer team, the Toronto Blue Jays, the baseball team. Even when you look on social media, when the Wolfpack existed, all of those teams were interacting with each other. The Wolfpack were part of that club, part of that inner circle. And it's not, the culture over there, it's not like in Australia where you're an NRL fan or you're an AFL fan. Over there, you can follow all the teams. That's completely fine. So a lot of the fans of those existing clubs were getting around the Wolfpack, and their game day experience was outstanding. The number of just events they had on, food trucks, the mayor of Toronto would attend their games. This is when they were playing third division rugby league. It was amazing what they were able to deliver. So, I was devastated. It was the most rugby league thing ever to have them get to the Super League, sign Sonny Bill Williams, and then be kicked out of the competition. There were a number of reasons for it, but that would have been so good. The guy who founded them, Eric Perez, someone I've had the pleasure of meeting a couple of times, he said that he saw rugby league for the first time and said, this is the most North American sport not played in North America. Like we're primed, I think, to take advantage of that. We talk about America, the NFL off season that we could, come into. We can't do it all at once. I understand that. Rome wasn't built in a day. And we are, making some inroads, but I just hope that the expansion strategies that we use there are oriented towards ground up rather than go there, play 2 NRL games a year in Vegas and hope that people will notice, because that's not how it works, unfortunately.
No, it's not. And the other thing is too and we've talked about having to have that connection to the local competition whenever you do anything. I feel as though what the NRL is doing in Las Vegas, and I understand what they're aiming for with it, but it does nothing for rugby league in the United States. Absolutely nothing. And it's not even as though some of the games they're putting on feature local clubs, or even, the United States versus Canada or Jamaica or something like that. They're just not involved in it at all. And I just think that's not good enough. And you would think it would be the easiest thing in the world. Like, what content can we put on? Let's have the United States play Canada. Like, why aren't they doing that? But, I think that this year showed with that game that they made some mistakes with some of the games they put on, and they realized that they need to, rejig the whole sort of event a little bit, so that, you don't make it such a long day and you don't have so many blowouts and things like that. So tell me one of the things, like, I don't know that we've had a couple of people that did go to Toronto Wolfpack games, but we haven't had anybody that's experienced an NRL game, for instance, and then gone and experienced that. What was the thing that stood out the most when you were at a Toronto Wolfpack game?
It's a good question. I would say the key difference was the real sense of community you got there. Mm-hmm. It could have been a symptom of the surrounding area. It was pretty sort of compact. The precinct that Lamport Stadium, which is where they played, was located. But when you went there, there was music. Everyone was talking. Everyone was so friendly. Maybe that's just because they were Canadians, but they were very friendly. And yeah, I'll never forget, sitting up in the grandstands, me and my dad, we've got different accents to everybody else. But everyone's just so interested in, our opinions on the game, what we have to say, where we've come from. So what they were building there was so, it was something you could belong to and be really happy to belong to. And in the NRL, yes, we have that. We all have our clubs. We're seeing at the moment, obviously with the Bulldogs, the amount of community groundswell they're getting, but there is something a little bit more sanitized about going to an NRL game, a little less of that atmosphere, that you don't really, like, you don't get the same level of community, I think, at that very top level as you do in sort of the grassroots foundational sense.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's like you get to a point where you get so big that it sort of goes away from just being your community and it becomes something else, doesn't it? Like, I mean, I think Newcastle probably has it to a certain extent still, but they're once again a bit of an outlier in the way things are. But yeah, it's interesting. I said that when the Toronto Wolfpack got kicked out of Super League, like, if they hadn't have been in the very worst place on the planet, they probably would have been brought straight into the NRL. But unfortunately, I think it would be something like a 27-hour flight time from the east coast of Australia to Toronto. It's just in the worst place possible, unfortunately. But yeah, it was, the way they said to them, look, if you want to get in the competition, you've got to go through all the grades and do it properly. And then they did it properly. And then, like, what was it, 2 or 3 weeks into, I think, their Super League journey, that was over. And the thing that I think, too, that was so upsetting was that it was so easy for that decision to be made by the English authorities. Like, it wasn't like they said, oh, we don't want to do this, we'll bring him back next year or something. They were like, okay, it's over. And that was, I found that disgusting, to be honest.
Yeah, well, there's definitely a sense among English fans, and I'm not saying that this is reflective of all of them, but say you're a supporter of Wakefield Trinity, right? You love your club. What your club means to you is equivalent to what any NRL club means to any fan over here in Australia. But deep down, Wakefield is not, the future of the game. It's not, if we grow, Wakefield aren't going to be part of it anymore. So there's actively an incentive for you to not want an outsider like Toronto, who offers so much international potential, to come in and show you up for, what you really are, which is a local team in a very local town.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, look, on the Wolfpack, one thing I didn't mention earlier, after the games, there was a pub that they were partnered with. I can't remember the name of it, but after every home game, the whole squad would go to this pub and just mingle with everyone. Even the owner, who his name slips my mind, I believe he was an Australian with some mining money. But he'd just be there, having a beer. You could go up and chat to him. And yes, if they had gotten, substantially bigger and reached their potential, you might have lost something like that. But the point is they were doing it right. They had the humility to know, okay, even if we are Toronto, we represent this massive city, we're going to build the community from the ground up. And an organization doing it so right in an area that is so remote, that's so rare in rugby league.
Yeah.
It would have been so good for us to take advantage of. But an example like in America, what you talk about Vegas, which is very much coming over the top level and hoping that trickles down. Just before COVID, to my memory, there was an announcement about the NARL. I don't know if you had heard about it at the time, but the North American Rugby League, it was going to be called. All these teams were announced in different conferences. They managed to...
Oh, yeah, that's right. I forgot about that, yeah.
The ideas were awesome. They managed to find a way to integrate the Cleveland Rugby League in there as well. They're a very big independent organization, but they managed to bridge the gap in the politics. All sorts of things. New York was floated as one of the teams. They were linked with signing Jared Hayne at the time. Toronto were going to be part of it. This was just after they were removed from the Super League. But unfortunately, COVID killed it. But in years since then, there have been some little, games played between these teams, little friendly games. There's something that is just, the structure is there, but it's currently lying dormant. To get that up and running, we're talking a minute fraction of what the NRL get in a broadcast deal, particularly given that in 2028 we're renegotiating with yet another game in our pockets with PNG coming in. So that's all it would take. If the NRL are serious and genuine about expansion of rugby league into the US, then that's the kind of thing they should be funding. But maybe the skeptic in me thinks what they really want is the gambling revenue for their own Australian domestic purposes, and that's why we're in Vegas. But
I think that's got a portion to do with it, and I think because Valandis is in horse racing in Australia, it's also another aspect of that. And yeah, if at the very worst it's a weekend game away, it's just another event, right? That's fine, but when they try and dress it up as more than that, that's when I start going, come on, man. At the moment, it's just a weekend away footy game, and let's not pretend that we're changing the world here, I want to ask you about my thoughts on an NRL expansion team. And we actually, I think this is the 558th episode from memory of our podcast, right?
Well done.
On the first episode, I said that I would like to see an NRL expansion club in Honolulu, Hawaii, because it's 10 hours, so it's not terrible, but it is by far and away the longest away trip we would have. But I just feel as though you could set up a team in Honolulu and it be your representative team of the entire Pacific. And you're getting, I know it's not mainland USA, but you're getting a little foothold into the United States in some way. What do you think of that idea for an expansion club? Maybe not the next one, but maybe when we're looking at the 22nd, for instance, expansion club, something like that.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. That is an idea that I had never heard of until a couple of days ago. I
saw there was who was it that brought it up? Triple M or someone brought it up, something like that.
Certainly, I mean, as I say, for that reason, it wasn't particularly on my radar. From where we are right now, the two teams that I think we have to get in, one is Perth. That would have been my 18th team for Papua New Guinea, and the South Island of New Zealand. Looking at the South Island Kia or the Wellington Orcas, either of them, there's a great new stadium that's being built in Christchurch. If we could get into that action, that'd be great. I wasn't personally a big fan of Papua New Guinea. I was actually quite outspoken against it. which wasn't a great career move because about half my audience is from PNG. But I just, as an expansionist, I didn't really see the reasoning behind expanding into a country where rugby league is the national sport, where it is like, already a bit of a saturated market. But with Perth and a second New Zealand team coming in for Team 20, that's when I think the quality of options suddenly opens up a lot more. You could go another Queensland team, you could go Adelaide potentially, but that's where Honolulu comes in. And yeah, demographically speaking, you've got sort of the island population there, which could potentially feed through talent to the NRL. It's obviously a great destination in terms of away days. So you get partnerships going, like we see with Vegas, the NRL are partnered with Fiji Airways. You could get a partnership with an airline to get fans out to Honolulu. It's definitely one of the more, I guess, pie in the sky options, if that's the right expression. But it's one that when you sit down and think about it, there is quite a bit of logic to it. And yeah, as we come back to saying, if the NRL are serious about expanding into America, you're bridging that gap suddenly over to mainland US, so it makes sense.
Yeah, now like it's when it would have to be when you're starting to look at like, you've almost got the national footprint sorted, and you're starting to look at the feasibility of having teams in areas or in places where you are actually, it is real proper expansion. You're trying to capture something you don't have right now. Like I wouldn't be surprised if within, like, say when we get to and the competition's going to expand over time, but when we start getting towards like 24 teams or stuff like that, we'll start looking at having a team in Asia somewhere where we're trying to either capture another gambling market or another TV market or something, And when you start looking at those sorts of things, then it becomes really exciting. But yeah, I like the idea of having a team in Honolulu, and I tell you what, it'd be the easiest place to get players to go and play, because everyone would love living in Hawaii. It's such a nice place.
You reckon you can convince NRL fans to live in Port Moresby? Then yeah, and NRL players, sorry, then yeah, they can definitely go live in Hawaii.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. So yeah, I think, look, I didn't think we would have you on for this long. I didn't want to take up your whole evening, but thank you for being with us. Where can we find all of your things, your social media and everything? Where can we find you?
Yeah, well, YouTube is the big one for me, the Leaguie on YouTube. As you mentioned earlier, yes, I have a second channel called Leaguie Cast, which is available on YouTube as well as any audio platform. But recently I've started taking a bit of a swing as well at TikTok, which is the _Leaguie, and Instagram, which is just the Leaguie. So yeah, it's going well. But look, absolute like honor to be on. I'm flattered anytime I get invited onto one of these things that anyone has an interest in hearing me ramble on for an hour and a half. So yeah, thank you so much for having me on, and I'd be happily back anytime.
Yeah, mate, we'll have you on anytime you want. And once again, it was just awesome to see somebody having a well thought out opinion on the game, not resorting to, the NRL 360 type crap, which is, there's too much of that in the game at the moment. And so when I saw somebody really, having a well thought out opinion, it was like, I want to talk to this dude. So yeah, we would love to have you on again, and we'll get you on with Andrew as well. The only reason Andrew's not here is because he likes to record when it's about 10:30 at night, and it's like, it kills me and it kills him. And I thought, I'll get you on at a normal time first, and then we'll destroy your sleeping patterns later down the track.
That's all right. I'm a double degree law student. My sleeping pattern's already destroyed.
Oh man. Anyway, thank you for listening. Thank you for everyone that's listening on. Make sure you go and you listen to the League and Leaguecast, and we'll catch us later.
Thanks, guys.